Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, February 25th, 2025, and our friend Scott Ritter is back with us. Welcome back.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Let's get started, Scott, with the way that Donald Trump is trying to deal with Europe. What are the major difficulties, the major challenges that he's facing in dealing with European leaders?
He has no difficulties and he has no challenges. Europe poses no challenge to the United States on any issue. Um, it's as simple as that. There's nothing Europe can do to stop Donald Trump from achieving his goals and objectives. If Europe continues to resist, then Europe will pay a very heavy price. Europe is incapable of standing on its own 2 feet. Um, And if it chooses to try and unify to stand up to the United States will simply use the tactics of divide and conquer and isolate the individual nations that are causing the most problems and um, cause so much pain that their political system collapses. And it's that simple. So no, there's literally no problem that Donald Trump faces in the form of Europe.
Do you see any sort of differences between, for instance, the president of Poland and Emmanuel Macron from France? Is there any sort of differences in the way that they're seeing the conflict in Ukraine, or they're totally unified in some sort of strategy, policy, whatever we can call
Well, we know they're not unified because Poland has backed away from French propositions. Um, Look, Poland has positioned itself to be relevant within NATO by creating the circumstances for American forces to be stationed on Polish soil. Fifth Corps headquarters forward is there, together with a brigade of American armor, other prepositioned stockpiles that allow the United States to, in theory, reinforce its force structure in Poland up to division size elements. France doesn't have this. So right off the bat, we're talking about two completely different problem sets. Poland seeks to create the conditions that sustain a continued American military presence on Polish soil. France is seeking military relevance, which it doesn't have at the moment. Um, we see a bid by France for some sort of European strategic relevance by um, threatening, offering, I don't know what the right term is, to deploy nuclear capable aircraft on German soil. Um, that would be the death of NATO. The United States has a decades long um, procedure in place where U.S. nuclear weapons are provided to NATO as part of a NATO shield. Should France seek to unilaterally alter this equation by deploying what France claims to be its own sovereign nuclear force, independent of the NATO structure, now onto a NATO member, that just makes it easier for the United States to withdraw the totality of its nuclear weapons from Europe, which would make American nuclear negotiations easier. Then what this would do is open up France now to be the guarantor of European security in terms of a nuclear umbrella. Russia would simply then take its intermediate nuclear forces and target them on France almost exclusively, and France would have to sue for peace. And now France is in the situation where they have to negotiate a nuclear arms agreement with Russia, having no leverage whatsoever. So again, I'm just sitting here watching Europe commit suicide because Europe doesn't understand that it's not the shot caller here. The United States is the shot caller. We alone call the shots, and we have dictated that there will be peace in Ukraine and that relations with Russia will improve. It's the only sane thing to do. To head down a path of seeking to confront Russia only leads to one outcome, and that is a nuclear war that destroys everybody. The United States, under the leadership of President Trump, has decided that's not a path we want to go down. Therefore, anybody who opposes American policy, this isn't a simple policy disagreement. This is an issue of existential survival for the United States and the world. I'll say that one more time just so it sinks in. If you oppose America's peace plan in Ukraine, America's efforts to reconcile with Russia, to normalize relations with Russia, then you are becoming an existential threat to the national security in the United States, and you will be treated as such. You will be destroyed, not physically. We're not out to declare war against you, But you name one European nation, I can tell you how in 6 months we can collapse their economy and cause their governments to fail. There's not a single government in Europe that can withstand the might of the United States, the economic and political might. We can isolate anybody instantaneously. Do we want to do this? No. But we're not going to stand by idly while Europe seeks to put the American people at existential risk by continuing a war that should never have been fought. And now that we have an opportunity to close it, people should never seek to oppose this American brokered peace.
What's your perception of the meeting between Donald Trump and Emmanuel Macron, in which Emmanuel Macron was talking about compensating the West, United States, together with Europeans, but the first priority is Ukraine to be compensated because of this war. But who's going to compensate that? It would be, in his opinion, it would be Russia that should pay for all of this. How how do you see the way that he sees the solution for the conflict in Ukraine?
I don't consider anything. This was a throwaway meeting. It has no meaning whatsoever. Nothing came of this meeting. I mean, Emmanuel Macron got to fill up Donald Trump's knee. I hope he enjoyed that moment. But beyond that, this meeting brought nothing to the table. The serious discussions will take place between Sergei Lavrov and Marco Rubio in the coming days, followed up by the meetings between the only two leaders that matter in this issue, and that's Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Emmanuel Macron, it came to the White House. We know that this wasn't, going to be a good event for him because Donald Trump didn't meet him at the front door. He made Macron walk the walk of shame. That is the walk of irrelevance. Yes, he got to sit down with Trump and have a little discussion. Then they did a little joint press conference. There were no agreements made. There were no commitments made. Trump just sort of looked at him like, whatever, say what you want to say and leave, which he did. He flew in, was humiliated by not being greeted at the door, said what he wanted to say, and then he flew home. No state dinner, no nothing. It was an act of irrelevance, and Keir Starmer will do the same thing in the coming days. None of them matter to us. We don't need them. We don't want them, especially when they're obstructionist. If France thinks they're going to take $300+ billion of Russian sovereign wealth and somehow use that to pay for Ukraine, they're smoking dope. That just will not happen at all. Donald Trump will never go for it. And eventually, if France wants to join the family of nations, and notice what I'm saying here, you see the script has been flipped. It used to be if Russia wants to join the family of nations. But I think if you take a look at what happened at the United Nations recently, you'll see that, gosh, it was the United States voting with Russia, China, Belarus, North Korea, and it was France and the United Kingdom in opposition. Let's just put those two relevant forces on a scale and see which outweighs which. France and England are on the wrong side of history. Germany is on the wrong side of history. They're irrelevant. They don't matter. We don't care. And the proof is that we're going to go forward with an agreement with Russia that they have no say in whatsoever.
When you see these European leaders coming one by one, instead of, I don't know, making some sort of meeting between all of the European leaders together with the United States, what are they trying to, I don't know, to say to Donald Trump? What would be their position, their political point of view toward Ukraine, considering their position in Europe, their sort of strategy, or the situation is getting worse than that for Europeans, that they cannot bring something substantial, something more important that would be attractive for Donald Trump and his administration?
Well, right now, each European nation is playing to their own national egos. France is, putting emphasis on the, long relationship that dates back to Lafayette. and the assistance France provided in the revolution. And yes, we appreciate that. Anybody who has studied American history knows the importance of the French role in the American Revolution. We repaid that in 1917. Lafayette, we are here. General Jack Pershing said, as we put over 1 million Americans across the sea to save France from Germany. And we did save France. We saved the Western world from Germany. And we did it again in the 1940s, saving France, saving Europe from Germany. So the idea that France holds something over us is ludicrous. We've saved France twice in the last century, and we're going to save them again by avoiding a third world war with Russia. But Macron believes that he can come in. He had past meetings with Donald Trump in the first term where Trump went to France and they famously got along. It was sort of a bromance, and he's hoping to play on that. But Donald Trump's not playing that game anymore. Donald Trump was polite, but the idea that France has a special relationship with the United States capable of putting pressure on Donald Trump to walk away from or modify the strategic agreement that he's getting ready to undertake with Russia is absurd. Let's just take a look at, for instance, and this is what everybody needs to focus on going out. See, Macron and Starmer and everybody, they're coming in and they're dealing with the United States as if security is now defined in militaristic terms, the way it was in the past. How much percentage GDP you can put into your defense, what role you play in NATO, etc. Trump's off that game. Trump doesn't play that game. Trump has taken James Carville's maxim from 1992, you'll sticky on the door for Bill Clinton in their war room as Bill Clinton ran for president. It's the economy, stupid. And that's the fact. It's the economy. And Trump has made a decision that this militaristic posturing by the United States is economically detrimental to the national security of the United States. I don't know how big our trade relationship is with France or Europe. I do know that it's not $7 trillion. That's the size of the mineral deposits that Vladimir Putin put on the table the other day for joint exploitation by the United States and Russia. This is in addition to the $350 to $500 billion worth of minerals. And it's opening the door for others. Multi-trillion-dollar deposits in the Congo are now on the table for the United States and perhaps Russia, if it becomes a good partner to develop in Africa to create security. You see what's happening here. It's a paradigm shift in how security guarantees are being viewed by the world. No longer is it about American divisions on the ground or anybody's divisions on the ground. It's about economic relationships. And France doesn't get it. See, France isn't proposing an economic relationship. Europe continues to commit suicide. Germany last year spent $21 billion buying liquid natural gas from the United States. We provide 80% of Germany's liquid natural gas, by the way. And yet they turned around and spent $18 billion funneling that to Ukraine. Think of the economics of that, and how stupid it is, and how it's committing suicide. All of Europe is committing suicide. There's not a single European nation whose economic balance sheet makes sense from this war. They're destroying themselves economically. And again, Trump isn't playing the game. Who are they trying to impress? Europe will never be able to stand up to Russia. I already told you that if France puts nuclear capable aircraft into Germany, it destroys the decades-old American-backed NATO nuclear deterrence capability. And Trump will walk away from that in a heartbeat. And then France is left holding a bag that it can't afford to hold. It will fold like a house of cards together with the rest of Europe. Europe just hasn't thought this through. I've always said that NATO has been literally is an extension of American national security policy. That's it. NATO has no ability for independent policy formulation and implementation. It is an extension of America. The same thing with the EU. Its economy is driven by dictate coming from the G7, influenced by the G20, which are all dominated by the United States. So in effect, we can say that the United States is Frankenstein and that NATO and the EU are Frankenstein's monsters. Well, the United States, the Frankenstein, was the deep state, something that this unelected bureaucracy that carried forward from administration to administration. It's dead. It doesn't exist anymore. It's been destroyed by Donald Trump. Vladimir Putin once warned of American presidents making promises on campaigns only to come into the Oval Office and have men in black suits show up and read them the reality, and those promises couldn't be met. Those men in black suits don't exist anymore. They've been fired. They're going to be arrested. It's just not there. So Frankenstein is dead. Dr. Frankenstein is finished. So what we have are Frankenstein's monsters who can't survive without Dr. Frankenstein, but they're still alive, stumbling around Europe, pretending that they're relevant. They're not. They're just monsters, and they will be put down. That's the reality of it.
Do you think that Donald Trump, in the big picture that he has, you're talking about objectives and goals of Donald Trump, are they beyond the economy of the United States in terms of military security with Russia and China, or it's all about the economy?
I think Donald Trump has made a decision that, and he has said this again. We go back to his campaign where he said that the greatest threat to the national security of the United States is the United States, and he further articulated that in the form of this rules-based international order, which he said imposes America on the world in a way the world isn't comfortable with and no longer desires. And if we continue to insist, as the Biden administration did, to double down on forcefully implementing the rules-based international order, then the world will turn against us. So he's changing the way in which the United States interfaces with the rest of the world. We can't be imposing our will. Let's just take a short class right now on what Trump talked about BRICS and de-dollarization, because a lot of people are talking about it and they've got it 100% wrong. The notion that Donald Trump came in and lectured BRICS about de-dollarization and threatened BRICS with 100%, 150% tariffs, and BRICS collapsed like a house of cards in fear over the wrath of Donald Trump. You know, that's a narrative that's coming out. Trump is encouraging that narrative. It's absurd as the day is long. BRICS never wanted to de-dollarize. Vladimir Putin, who ran the BRICS summit last October, said, even as he presented the 100, whatever the hell that note was called, the BRICS notional money, he said BRICS isn't leaving the dollar. The dollar left BRICS. The problem isn't BRICS. China doesn't want to de-dollarize. India certainly doesn't want. Brazil has said de-dollarization will not be at the top of the agenda or even on the agenda in the Brazilian-led BRICS summit this year. Why? Because de-dollarization makes no sense. I mean, you have to do it if the dollar is going to be denied to you, but economically it's inefficient. It's expensive. It makes no sense. Nobody wants to de-dollarize. What they want, though, is that the dollar be available to them without consequence. So what Trump has said is that if you de-dollarize, I'll sanction you. Okay, that's one side of the equation. But now you tell me, if Donald Trump enters into a multi-trillion-dollar joint exploitation venture and opens up the Russian economy for American investment, is he going to do it without the dollar or with the dollar? And we know what the answer is. It's with the dollar. So the dollar will now be made available to Russia. We already see Visa and MasterCard talking about going into Russia. Good luck. Russia's built up the Mir payment system, and I don't know if they're going to just turn that back over to foreign banks. But the convenience of the dollar will now be made available to Russia. And what the United States was doing by secondary sanctions of nations who worked with Russia using additional, that disappears. If Russia has access to the dollar, there's no need to look for alternatives to the dollar. So Russia and India now will interact in the dollar. Russia and China in the dollar. The dollar will become the dominant currency again. And the scope and scale of the potential economic engagement between Russia and the United States is such that you can't untangle that. This will be strategic in nature. Canada right now is just they've committed suicide because, of course, they thought they were clever in standing up to Trump and talking about putting tariffs on aluminum. We got the Americans right now, the aluminum, and Putin went, yeah, we'll give you all the aluminum you need. Don't worry about it. That's the end of Canada. So it's a brave new world, and when we talk about China, just mark my words. Trump isn't going to be seeking to be confrontational with China. Trump is going to be looking for similar opportunities for large-scale massive economic integration between China and the United States so that both nations thrive and neither nation can be in a position to threaten the other. And the way this is going to be done is not by trying to create a leverage between Russia and China, but to treat Russia, China, and India as a geopolitical economic singularity that America is plugging into. BRICS is no longer the enemy. BRICS is going to be used by the United States for its own benefit. It's sort of a cheap way to get to the global south, a shortcut. This is the direction that Donald Trump is heading in, I believe. And it's a direction that redefines how America interfaces with the world. It's not about the world having to live by rules imposed by the United States, but the United States creating a new set of rules together with the big players in the world that says we will now seek economic collaboration as our primary methodology of coexistence, a distinct departure from military adversarial relationships or economic competition. You see, you don't compete with people that you're jointly developing trillion-dollar mineral wealth with. You cooperate with them. So I think this is the direction that we're heading. As I said before, we're in the midst of a revolution, and every aspect of the United States today is going through revolutionary transformation, domestically and from a foreign policy standpoint.
Since you've mentioned Europeans not being capable of confronting Donald Trump, how about the establishment in the United States? I'm talking about Democrats, Republicans, and we have even Republicans talking against Donald Trump, talking the way that they're not agreeing on what Donald Trump is talking about. How do you think that this establishment is going to deal with Donald Trump and his sort of way of dealing with the issues, political issues? I'm talking about the foreign affairs of the United States, not the internal affairs.
There is no viable opposition to Donald Trump. It's as simple as that. The Democrats are finished. They're ruined as a political party. They don't stand for anything. They're incapable of resistance. And we need to stop thinking about the Republican Party as the governing party. MAGA is the governing authority in America today. Make America great again. If you call yourself a Republican and you're not aligning yourself with MAGA, then you're basically the old Republican Party that Donald Trump crushed in 2016 when he went up against 17 of the Republican Party's most stalwart people and crushed them all in a primary to become president of the United States. There is no opposition, meaningful opposition to Donald Trump. He's not bluffing anymore. I think we might find out the reality of this come March. If people try to shut down the government, Donald Trump will shut down the government. And then he will destroy those people who shut down the government, eliminate them politically, declare national emergencies, and rule by emergency decree. See, he's not playing games anymore. He understands the weakness of the system. And he is going to come in swinging, and he will crush anybody who gets in his way. This is the revolution that I'm talking about. Revolutions don't happen half-assed. You know, there's that old saying, if you're going to strike the king, kill the king. Well, if you're going to take on the deep state, kill it, and kill it fast. The key thing about what you have to understand about what Trump's doing is he is moving so fast that the establishment will never get a chance to recover. I've written about this. I've invoked John Boyd's OODA loop to get inside the decision-making cycle of your enemy. And believe me, anybody who's not with Donald Trump is the enemy of Donald Trump. And so, you know, the OODA loop, you know, observe, orient, decide, act. That means that you are going to act and they're going to react, and you're going to continue that dynamic until you destroy them. What you don't want to do is act, they react, then you don't act, so they act again, and now you're reacting to them. Donald Trump will not be in the reaction mode. Donald Trump is there to make everybody react to him and therefore control the dynamic, to get inside their decision-making cycle and to kill him politically, economically, whatever. And so he's moving very, very fast. He is not going to allow anybody the opportunity to say, halt, stop, we want to pause. There will be no pause. Look with the courts. You know, he will. We're getting the scary ground here, but Andrew Jackson once said of the Supreme Court. Someone said that Supreme Court said you couldn't do this. He said, "Tell them to enforce it." If you are a judge and you go against Donald Trump, you will be impeached. You will be defunded. You will be destroyed, or you will be ignored. This is a revolution. We are in the midst of a revolution. And this revolution won't stop until everything about what made America horrible. And America was a nation that was fundamentally sick because of the establishment, because of the disease of corruption that had infiltrated everything. Donald Trump's here to clean it out. He talked of the last term about, draining the swamp, but he never did it because he didn't know anything about DC. He admits it. He said, I didn't know how to govern, and I had to bring in the swamp in order to help me, and the swamp didn't let me do anything. He came in, and from day one, he said, the hell with the swamp. If you're in the swamp, you don't get to play with me. We get to destroy you. And he is destroying everything. Is it pretty? No. Does it cause pain and suffering? Absolutely. It's a revolution. And you need to understand that. Everybody needs to understand that. Thank God we're not bringing the guillotines out. When you fall victim to this revolution, you get to go home. But you don't get to stay in your government job if that government job wasn't, was nothing more than an employment vehicle for you. The government isn't a jobs program. The government doesn't exist to have a self-licking ice cream cone. You must accomplish something. You must have tasks that you are accomplishing. And if you're not, you're shown the door. It's a revolution. You see, the establishment, this deep blob, was a permanent, unelected mass of bureaucracy that was designed on purpose to strangle change, to prevent somebody from coming in and saying, I want to make a change, and then it would strangle them, delay, slow it down, and then eventually they had to ignore it. That's not happening here. Donald Trump has killed it, and he is moving forward at breakneck pace. And if you don't accept that, I'm sorry. I mean, I have to laugh at all the people that when I first said this, when it first happened, they're like, no, it's not. Oh, really? Where are we now? We're a month in. We're a month in. And Donald Trump has steamrolled over everything that got in his way. And it's only going to get worse. So for all you people out there that are saying, well, it's not a revolution, you don't matter, because it is a revolution. And it's over for you if you oppose it. So that's where we're at.
What's your take on Germany? People wanted some sort of political change in Germany, but I would argue, same kind of political views are now going to be in charge in Germany. The same.
No one's going to be in charge of Germany. Nobody's in charge of Germany. Understand this: one failed government replaced another failed government. And this government that's coming in has no chance of succeeding. None whatsoever. Moreover, if it seeks to embark on some of the policy initiatives it's talking about, it will be going head to head against the most powerful, significant nation in the world. That's America. And Germany isn't a powerful, significant nation. Just because they had an election doesn't mean suddenly Germany's strong. One of the reasons why they had an election is their economy is failing. Their economy is still failing, and it will continue to fail. One of the reasons there was an election is that they had an immigration problem. They will continue to have an immigration problem. This government didn't have the guts to say, we're going to live up to our campaign promises. They're not going to solve anything. They're going to create the same coalition, just shuffling some pieces around, the same failed coalition. But here's what's going to kill them. They're going to go against the United States when it comes to Ukraine, and the United States will destroy them. This government will collapse within 6 months if it goes against the United States. We will collapse their economy. We will ensure that this government is isolated, fails, and will suffer a vote of no confidence very quickly. If they don't understand that the Trump administration backs the Alternative for Deutschland party, then they don't understand anything. I don't know why the German people did what they did. Maybe they need a little bit more refresher course on how stupid the former policies were, that their failed government, the one that got the vote of no confidence, was taking them down. But this government will have a vote of no confidence within 6 months. Mark my word. Germany is on the same rotation of prime ministers that Great Britain was on. where you have a system that is in total free fall collapse and no government can save it, and you'll just get one replacement after the other, until which time AFD is able to garner sufficient votes not only to win an election, but win it with a majority capable of governing, and then you'll see it all come to an end. But that's the trajectory Germany's on, and there's nothing you can do to stop that trajectory. That is an inevitable trajectory of Germany. We're just looking at, one of these footnotes of history. It seems like a big deal right now, but trust me, when the history of Germany is written, this is just going to be a little footnote where it says, "Oh, in the 2025 election, Merz was able to get enough votes to become chancellor, but his government collapsed within the 6 months, and then we moved on, and there was another interim government until Alice was able to come in and take charge." That's the direction we're heading. Germany is an irrelevant nation right now because it doesn't have any capabilities. None. Was it going to bring the Taurus missile into Ukraine? No, it's not. No, it won't.
When you talk about the establishment in the United States and the way that Donald Trump is getting the upper hand right now in dealing with them, how about the situation in Europe? Do they have any sort of leverage on Europe and the way that Europe is? They can somehow manipulate what's going on in Europe. Do you see the connection between the establishment in the United States and what's going on in Europe?
Europe has nothing. I just told you. Germany, 80% of liquid natural gas comes from the United States. Okay, game, set, match. Anytime we want, we can shut down the German economy instantly. And they have no alternatives because let's say the Danes and the Norwegians wanted to come in and say, "Oh," or the Dutch, we'll bring you secondary sanctions, baby, and we'll shut them down too. See, we own the world, the Western world, because they've been subservient to us for so long. They don't know how to be adults. These are people that should have flown the nest a long time ago, but instead opted to live in the basement, letting me feed them, letting me clothe them. I pay for their internet. I pay for everything. And now they dare stand up and say, "We have a voice." You have no voice. You're nothing. Nothing. If you want to be something, then you need to do what we tell you to do so that we can disengage. You see, we do want to get out of Europe. We do want you to grow up. But in order to do that, we have to look out for our best interests. And our best interests are to have normal, peaceful relations with Russia. Because Russia's a hell of a lot bigger and a hell of a lot more important than Europe will ever be. We have to stop talking about Europe as a singularity. It's not. There is no such thing as Europe or the European Union. That's a facade. Europe is a collection of sovereign nation states. And Donald Trump is going to treat them as a collection of sovereign nation states. That's another reason why Macron has come by himself. That's another reason why Starmer will come by himself. And that, Trump will not ever receive a European Union or European Commission delegation in the White House because they don't exist. They're non-entities. They have no power. They have no say. So, Europe can't put any problems to the United States because there's not a single European country that we can't crush overnight. Literally.
Who's gonna benefit in a long run? Who's gonna be better for Europe in the United States in a long run? A Biden type presidency or Donald Trump type presidency? Do you think that in a long run Europe would be the way that Donald Trump is dealing with Europe? Do you think that would make Europe be more sane? Just reconsidering what they're doing right now and making, I don't know, some sort of to make new policies in terms of dealing with the United States and the East and the West.
Joe Biden would have sustained the rules-based international order, model that would have perpetuated Europe's permanent status as a subservient lot to America. Donald Trump is trying to create the conditions for an American withdrawal from Europe so that Europe will have to stand up on its own. But you see, people would say, well, that's what Europe's trying to do. No, it's not. Every proposal that Europe has put forward in anything always is contingent upon an American backstop. Even the brave French and British proposal to put 30,000 troops into Ukraine, not on the front lines, but there as a deterrence, requires an American backstop. That means you're not independent. That means you're not capable of anything. If you need us, you're nothing. And right now, Europe needs us, can't do anything without us. So therefore, Europe is nothing. So what's best for Europe? To continue down a path of being subservient to the United States. That was because they were pushing forward these policies of antagonism towards Russia, leading towards a nuclear war that would have destroyed all of Europe. Just make it very simple. Biden would have destroyed Europe. A Biden-type approach would have destroyed Europe. Or Trump, who wants to make a truly independent Europe. But, there's this thing called tough love. If my kid's living in the basement and they're now 40 years old, maybe it's time I kick him out of the basement and make him get a job, make him learn what it's like to pay the bills. Tough love. Oh, it's problematic for the kid when he has to first leave the basement and get that job. They don't want to do that. They're kicking and screaming and all that. But eventually they get the job, they get a paycheck, they pay their rent, and they go, wait a minute, I'm independent. I'm my own person. Now, they don't live under my larger social economic umbrella. They don't get my club membership and all that, but they get to be themselves. And by creating good relations with Russia, they get to be themselves without fear of the gang next door coming in and beating them up. You see, because we're going to be at good relations with Russia, therefore Europe will be at good relations with Russia. Donald Trump is the best model for Europe going forward one can imagine. It's the only chance Europe ever has of becoming relevant. And again, it won't be relevant as a singularity, but be relevant the way old Europe used to be, where Germany was a nation state that people had diplomatic relations with. And Germany carried out its own independent foreign policy. France did as well. Italy did as well. That's the future of Europe, to break it down in this nonsense of a European singularity and to start talking about a collection of sovereign states.
For many years, Scott, the Eastern European were looking at the Western European to learn from them, understand the thing. And right now, it seems that, do you think that we are getting to the point that the Western Europeans should look at the Eastern Europeans to learn about how can they decide about their policies, their foreign policies, and what would be beneficial for them in a long run? How do
No.
you see the difference
First of
between
all,
the
there's no
Eastern and
Eastern
the
Europe.
Western part of Europe?
I mean, what you want the suicidal Chihuahua trio of the Baltic states?
Yeah,
Sounding like Alvin and the
Baltic
Chipmunks?
states are just little states. I'm talking about those countries who have tradition, who have long history, and
Like what? Poland? They have a tradition of getting their asses kicked, and they'll get their asses kicked again. I mean, if Poland, let me just tell you what the future of Poland could be. Are you ready? Here, let me put a scenario out there for you. Let's say Germany screws around with America, plays a fundamental game of we're going to get you. If I were in the CIA, I'm not, but if I were, I would go to Donald Trump and say, okay, this is what we need to do. Take a look at the last election map. Do you see something there, a pattern? AFD in the East, the others in the West. We need to break Germany up into two separate states. We need an East Germany and a West Germany again. So we need to impose economic warfare on the West, and we need to promote economic integration between East Germany and Russia. All right, now as we bring down Ukraine, we need to bring Western Ukraine into the mix. See, we're going to get the Poles on this one now, because we're going to offer Western Ukraine to the Poles. And when they bite and take the bait, then we're going to offer the return of German territory seized by the Poles at the end of World War II back to East Germany to make East Germany even stronger. We're going to break Poland up. We're going to give Poland the biggest nightmare they ever had, which is Western Ukrainian nationalists. And then we're going to weaken Poland by stripping away their German territories and giving that back to East Germany, making East Germany more relevant, weakening West Germany. You see what I just did there? And that, don't tell me it can't be done, because it can be done. Everything I talked about is being talked about right now. Every piece is being talked about. It's a potential. All we need is the CIA to go in and do what the CIA does, because that's what they do for a living. Now, ideally, I wouldn't want that to happen. Ideally, I'd like Germany to wake up and say, oh, we want peace. Then we don't need to do that. And Poland can stay intact. But if you want to screw with America, you're screwing with the Godfather. Okay? We do bad stuff. We're not angels. And we have a CIA that's expert at taking your pathetic little European countries apart. And we will do that if you want that to happen. So my advice to Germany is stop being stupid. Okay, you just had an act of national stupidity, electing this moron in there who is going to come in and he's going to commit political suicide within 6 months. But if you sustain the stupidity, then we have to destroy you.
So you don't see any sort of difference between Hungary together with Slovakia and the way that Germany is talking about, or France? There
No,
is some sort of difference.
Hungary's too small. First of all, Hungary's not a united nation. They have a very strong leader, Viktor Orban, but we see hundreds of thousands of people in the streets. So it's a fundamentally divided nation on the issue of this, that, or the other thing. It comes down to the economy. Those nations that have retained their energy connectivity with Russia are nations that recognize the importance of cheap energy, and therefore their policies reflect that. Those nations that have separated themselves from cheap Russian energy are nations now that have committed too much political capital into this divorce, and now they're trying to make the divorce work, but it's never going to work. Like I said, when you're Germany and you once had all that cheap Russian gas coming in, and now you're 80% dependent upon expensive American liquid natural gas that you can't afford. So I think this isn't about, who's wiser in terms of their political approach. None of them are wise. It's just that some have been able to hold on to economic advantages that dictate political outcomes, and others have divorced themselves from those advantages and are now paying the price. But at the end of the day, Europe is going to go where the economy takes them. There is no principle in Europe. There's no deep guiding principle of European unity and European values. What is a European value? There is no European value. There is no European democracy. How can you say there's a democracy when you have Germans running around arresting people for posting stuff on the internet? I mean, this is not democracy. When you have the German government saying, the second largest political party is going to be cut out. Nobody's allowed to do business with them. We're going to try and disenfranchise them judicially. That's not democracy. That's not democracy. There's no such thing as European democracy. Europe is a continent in disarray and chaos. And the solution to European disarray and chaos will come through the economy, and it will be energy driven. And that's just the reality of it.
Do you think it's all about energy? And is there any sort of strategy in Europe in terms of energy? Because after all, there has to be some sort of vision, some sort of strategy toward Russia. The way they're talking about, they know what Donald Trump thinks right now about the conflict in Ukraine. They're trying to insist on those failed policies of Joe Biden, and they want to harm Russia even more than what has been done so far to Russia. Do they really want a better relationship with Russia? Do they really see a better relationship with Russia, or they're considering getting energy from somewhere else? I don't know who's going to be able to provide them with that.
I think European leaders have been held prisoner by American policy prerogatives for so long that they don't know what they think. I mean, it's impossible for me to get in the heads of Europeans. Work with me on this one, Nima. Olaf Scholz, not a stupid man. I mean, educated, experienced politician. Why did he stand there like a cuckold husband watching his wife get raped by his neighbor when Joe Biden said, I will blow up Nord Stream 2. Why did he do that? Because he is not the leader of a sovereign state. Germany is completely beholden to the United States. And he allowed this to happen. And then he allowed the further, extinguishment of German connectivity with Russian energy, to the point now where the German economy is just destroyed. It's deindustrialized. So can we really speak about German leadership and what the Germans are thinking? You can't. You can't say that for any of the nations, because they have all in one way or another sold out to the old America. And what's happened is these leaders have put so much political capital in sustaining that system that they are defined by that system. Therefore, they cannot work with a system that is deviating from that fundamentally, which is Donald Trump. So it's the equivalent of a drowning person in the ocean. They are lashing out at anything to save themselves. But they're going to go down. They're done. Nobody's going to save them. The old model cannot be resuscitated because Donald Trump just killed it. Just killed it. And remember, I just want to remind the people that, the establishment can come back. Guys, we're into the first month of a 4-year revolution. And look what he's done. The first month. Wait till we have that conversation about the first 100 days, or the first 6 months, or the first year. This time next year, if we're still talking, take a look at the revolution then and realize there's 3 more years to go. The deep state is never recovering from this. Every aspect of the deep state will be deconstructed, because the deep state was reliant upon the money that the military industrial congressional complex and other links, pharmaceutical, whatever you want to, however you want to describe it, the way the deep state worked is they sucked this money and they turned it. The money became the blood that fed this cancerous tumor that was defining what America was. Trump isn't willing to let this tumor continue to exist. He's cut off the blood supply, and he's, taking a scalpel and removing it from America. It's never coming back, ever. Which means that any foreign entity that continues to define itself based upon the necessity to sustain that which is being killed by Trump condemns themselves to death. In Europe, by continuing to try and breathe life back into that Biden era model, it's just condemning themselves to death.
How do you see the western part of Ukraine, considering in case of having a Ukrainian settlement between Donald Trump and Russia? What would be the western Ukraine? Are they gonna be together? I'm talking about various ethnicities in that part: Armenians, Hungarians, Polish, and all of these various ethnicities in the western part of Ukraine. Or we're gonna see the collapse of the western part of Ukraine, or the situation would get worse for Europe and Russia in terms of security.
First of all, let's stop talking about Europe and Russia. There is no connectivity there. Russia's situation is going to get better because Russia's made a strategic decision to deal with the only nation that counts, and that's the United States. So let's not equate Europe's collapse and its, and the troubles that will befall Europe with anything to deal with Russia. Russia's already built an economic firewall. Europe doesn't count anymore. Doesn't matter. Is irrelevant to Russia. The sanctions, Russia doesn't impact Russia at all. And if the United States engages with Russia, it undoes everything about those sanctions. So we cannot speak as if Europe holds any leverage over Russia. They don't. None whatsoever. Western Ukraine. I mean, this is a problem. This is a real problem. We are dealing with a diseased people, ideologically diseased people who believe in something that you can't be allowed to believe in anymore. It's the equivalent of us trying to say at the end of World War II, well, we're going to let Bavaria hang out and the Nazi party be there. It's okay. The war's over. We destroyed the German army. Don't worry about it. But in Bavaria, the Nazi party gets to stay there, and they can have Hitler holidays, and they can do all that kind of stuff. Reenact the Munich beer push and all that. And do you think anybody would sit there and go, that's a good plan? That's a really good plan. No, it's a horrible plan. So we had to denazify Nazi Germany. You do that by arresting a number of leaders, put them on trial, and hang them by the neck until dead or shoot them. There must be blood. Go take a look at the Nuremberg Tribunal and the decisions that were made there. Examples had to be made. Examples had to be made to ensure that the German people understood that that which had governed them is illegal, illegitimate, an abomination to the world. And so examples had to be made. They hung, gosh, was it 12 of the 21 were hung. Only 3 were acquitted. And everybody else got either life sentences or lengthy prison sentences. That's going to have to happen. Banderas will have to hang by the neck until dead. They will have to. There will have to be trials for these people. They are war criminals, literal war criminals. And the political parties that sustain them have to be disenfranchised and made illegal, just like the Nazi Party was. There has to be constitutional changes. Now, this can be done if Donald Trump accedes to the Russian conditions, because Russia has said, I mean, we know how this is going to be done. It's written in the Istanbul Communique how this will be accomplished. All we have to do is say, yes, that's what we're going to do. Now, if we want to make this one of those things where we say, well, that's just too hard to do, and the Russians decide, well, you know, it's better for us to concede on this to get the bigger picture, then we're going to have a problem. And the way you deal with that problem is you give it to the Poles. That'll be the Russian solution, I believe. I don't speak for Russia. I don't know. I've heard within Russian circles that there is talk about carving that off. But this creates a lot of problems. I mean, for Russia, it's not a big deal. I mean, you know, hey, Poland, all you have to do for the Russians is just shout out, Volin, Volin, Volin. And the Poles get all round up, and then you give them Western Ukraine, they go in there and they'll slaughter everybody, which is a solution in its own right. But then what happens is you've created a precedent of carving up European borders that were supposed to be not able to be carved up anymore. And if you give away Western Ukraine to the Poles, then you're going to give away Ruthenia, and you're going to give away Carpathia, and you're going to give away, and you're going to see that Ukraine will be carved up. And then what you do is you open up the door for Russia to hold a referendum in Odessa, Kharkov, Dnipropetrovsk, Mykolaiv, and get those Russian populations to agree that those lands will, in 3 to 5 years, chop off over to Russia, and you're left with a tiny little rump state called Kievan Rus, and it's got no economic viability. That's not a good solution, because then again, it opens up to the door. Someday Germany will become, if the CIA doesn't break it up, will become a unified nation of great potential, and they will turn to Poland and say, yeah, you got your Western stuff back. We want ours back too. And now we have the potential of German-Poland conflict. So, you know, a lot of people, they'll say, oh, you can't give in to the Russians. You can't let them dictate the outcome in Ukraine. I say you have to let them dictate the outcome in Ukraine, because otherwise the solution is one that will be disastrous for Europe in the long run, that will lead to the lack of recognition of the permanence of borders, and will just pick off a scab on wounds that haven't healed. We know they haven't healed because we see the animosity between Germany and Poland about that border today. You know, so this is a real problem. So I think Western Ukraine, my feeling is that the Trump administration is paying more attention to what the Russians say than many people realize. And that they've bought into the notion of the reality-based premise of much of the Russian arguments, the factual accuracy of much of the Russian arguments. And if they do that, I think they'll find the wisdom of the Russian approach, which is denazification, as conceived by Russia, must be implemented in post-conflict Ukraine.
Do you see Russia accepting European troops or U.S. troops on
No,
on Ukrainian soil, or maybe Chinese troops. I don't know. Some
China's not going to put
think
troops on the border. There won't be
so.
there won't be a foreign there. There might be monitors, lightly armed monitors from foreign countries that have nothing to do with Europe. If I were the Russians, I'd get the Kazakhs to do it, the Belarusians to do it. You know, we could get a Uzbek contingent, Tajik contingent. Um, you know, not China. China's a Security Council nation, but I'm just saying that there's ways to get nations to provide police forces to do border control operations. But the idea of a peacekeeping force, people forget what peacekeeping is all about. In order to be peacekeeping, there has to be a peace to be kept. That means both sides have to agree to something, and then the peacekeepers come in and implement that which the both sides have agreed to. You can't have NATO come in and be a one-sided implementation, because the sole purpose of the Macron-Starmer force is to provide a deterrence against Russia. That's not a peacekeeping force. That's a force of war. And then Russia will have to kill them all, and they will kill them all. So we need to be careful with the terminology we use and what we expect of this. There will be no European forces on the ground in Ukraine. There will be no American forces on the ground in Ukraine. There will be no significant military forces on the ground in Ukraine. If this thing is going to go down, there will be a peace. The Ukrainian military will be demilitarized. That means there is no Ukrainian military in the way. You might have 50,000, maybe more, 80,000 Ukrainian forces that will become a border guard or a coast guard to protect the sovereign borders. And then they may be supplemented by international observers working with the Ukrainian border guards and with the Russians on both sides to ensure that the agreement is policed properly. But Russia is not seeking to create a demilitarized zone. Russia is seeking to create a new border where Russia is next to a Ukraine that's no longer postured to be a threat to Russia, a Ukraine that can be economically developed by Russia, so that eventually this Ukraine becomes in political and economic union with Russia in similar fashion to what Belarus has become. That's the Russian vision of Ukraine. They don't want Ukraine to be this failed nation state next door to them. Russia understands the importance of neighbors and the importance of good relations with neighbors. And so from the Russian perspective, if you're going to be a neighbor with Ukraine, that Ukraine has to be a vibrant nation capable of sustaining its population in meaningful fashion. And you can't do that. But you can't allow NATO in, and you really don't want them oriented towards the European Union. So what will happen is that Russia will shape events so that post-conflict Ukraine is governed by a pro-Russian government that will seek to turn to Russia, not the European Union, for its reconstruction needs. And the United States, I think what we're going to be seeing here is normally I wouldn't go on this limb, but I think it's just so obvious. The United States, Russia, and Ukraine will enter into a three-way mineral-based economic exploitation development pact, because this provides the foundation of security guarantees. Through economic relations comes the security guarantees. The United States isn't about the militarization of this problem. They're about actually transforming this into an economic opportunity for all involved. And I think when you speak of, the United States can't develop Ukraine's mineral wealth and Russia's mineral wealth in isolation of one another. So we're going to see a unifying compact that creates the ability of Ukraine and Russia to develop strong strategic economic ties. And with these strong strategic economic ties comes the security guarantee that people are looking for. And the United States will be a part of this as well. I think that's the direction we're heading. And if you have these strong economic ties, those economic ties define political outcomes. It's the economy, stupid. And again, if you get Ukraine on the path towards reconstruction, where you have meaningful jobs, meaningful reinvestment of profits from this exploitation back into Ukraine, then you'll see the strategic genius of Russia not destroying Ukrainian infrastructure. Because for 3 years, people, why aren't Russia blowing up the trains? Why isn't Russia blowing up the bridges? Why aren't they blowing up the dams? Because one day this war will end. And Russia wants Ukraine to succeed economically. And the decisions not to blow up the bridges, not to blow up the dams, not to blow up the tunnels, the rail lines, will come back and facilitate the rebirth of Ukraine economically. The less money you have to spend on infrastructure development or redevelopment, the more money you can spend on other economic issues, because this problem will be resolved economically, not militarily. And there's where Europe's making the mistake. They keep looking for a military solution where the problem is not being defined by Russia and the United States militarily. Like I said, I'm a little hesitant to go out on this because who knows what Trump and Putin are going to come up with, but they've put enough hints out there. And if the United States, if Donald Trump is talking about developing Ukrainian mineral wealth and working with the Russians to develop mineral wealth, you can't do that in isolation. The security guarantee comes from the joining of this opportunity. And I believe that's the direction we're heading, and that will dictate economic outcomes inside Ukraine going forward, which will dictate political outcomes.
How would a Ukrainian settlement influence the situation in the Middle East and between Israel and Palestine?
I mean, the Middle East had nothing to do with this problem starting, so it's not part of the solution. To the extent that Russia would be liberated to put more diplomatic resources into the Middle East, working with the Turks on the issue of Syria, for instance, working with Iran. We just saw Lavrov go to Iran and reiterate security pacts, etc. This is an important element of creating a firewall against any American military intervention. The United States doesn't want to go to war with Iran, but there's a need to address the question of Iran's nuclear program to the satisfaction of the United States. Resolve the Ukraine thing, get good American-Russian relations where we're talking to one another and cooperating with one another. Now we have the potential to bring Russia into the Iranian equation and stabilize that. And if you stabilize Iran, you take some pressure off of Israel. Russia, as people should know, played a very important role last year in bringing 14 Palestinian factions together to talk about creating a potential governing authority in a post-conflict Palestine. They turned that baton over to the Chinese, who took it a next step in this past summer. If Russia's liberated from this, and again, if Russia and the United States are working together as partners, now Russia can meet with their American counterparts and pitch this new governing entity as a replacement for Hamas. So there's potential for a lot of positive, role to be played here. But it requires two things. One, Russia having normalized relations with the United States along the full scope and spectrum of diplomatic interaction, and two, Russia being able to free up its economic, military, and political resources so that it can, invest them elsewhere. There's a significant investment in Russian capacity in this Ukrainian conflict right now. Peace would allow Russia to redistribute this capacity in a way that would, further peaceful development in a whole broad range of geopolitical problems.
Does Russia really want to stay in Syria, or they're just giving up on Syria and they're making new sort of strategy?
That's a question only Russia can answer. I can't answer that question. There's so many rumors and speculation going on right now about that. Let me just put it from my perspective. I think one of the main driving factors for Russia to intervene in Syria was to prevent Syria from becoming a cauldron of Islamic fundamentalism. that could easily then migrate out of Syria up through, um, you know, Turkey, into Georgia, into Chechnya, into the Northern Caucasus, and now you have problems. They wanted
By
to
the way,
prevent,
that's the main concern of Iran as well. They share the
of
same
course,
sort of.
yeah. And so, Iran's out of the Syrian problem directly. I mean, they're no longer plugged in with the government in Damascus. Russia, because of its military presence, the reality of its military presence continues to be there. Um, on the surface, of course, Russia isn't the natural ally of the Jolani government. But now, if I'm in the Russian foreign ministry, I turn to Vladimir Putin and I say, boss, this ain't perfect, but as long as we're in Syria, we have their ear. We have the ability to influence. Maybe not as strong as we did under Assad, but a little bit. And we can work towards achieving stability. And then my head of my intelligence would come up and say, and we can also keep an eye on Islamic extremism and gather intelligence, develop relationships with Jolani's people to find out, who amongst the Chechen diaspora in Syria is talking about, radicalizing and moving back in, who the Dagestanis, if, the Wahhabists, or they plan on making a return in. So I could make a case that it's in Russia's national security interest to maintain a presence in Syria, even though fundamentally that mission might be in opposition to what they originally sent there for. But this is just me speculating. I can't speak for the Russian government. I wouldn't speak for the Russian government. And only the Russian government can define what their national security interests are.
Just before wrapping up this session, Scott, the situation in Lebanon. On Saturday, we had the funeral of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon. What is your understanding, your take on what has happened during the last 15 months between Israel, Gazans, and Lebanon? How can we consider Hezbollah weaker? Are they going to continue the same way, or these wounds are making them stronger than before, at least mentally?
Well, first of all, look at the size of that funeral, 1.4 million people. Anybody who thinks Hezbollah is dead, think again. And the cause resonates deeply inside many corners of Lebanon and indeed around the world. So the notion that Hezbollah is defeated and no longer relevant has been mooted by this reality. The collapse of Syria has created a problem for the axis of resistance, but the axis of resistance, particularly Iran and Hezbollah, have said, we're not done, we're not finished. Hezbollah has a tricky political problem inside Lebanon that's been made less tricky by Israel's ridiculous decision to, build permanent bases inside illegally occupied territory inside southern Lebanon. All this does is legitimize the resistance aspect of Hezbollah's existence. Remember, Hezbollah was supposed to disarm in 2000, but they failed to do so. And their continued resistance was embraced by the Lebanese people because of Israel's holding on to just the Shebaa farms, which was contested. I mean, there's an argument to be made that it's Syrian, not Lebanese territory, but the Lebanese Hezbollah say it belongs to us. The Lebanese people agree. And so they tolerated this to include the 2006 war, which Hezbollah emerged even more powerful militarily and politically as the most significant resistor to Israeli aggression in the Middle East. This current conflict has been difficult. Yes, Hezbollah enjoyed great success against Israelis. They broke the back of the Israeli army. Just ask the Golani Brigade, ask the 7th Armored Brigade, ask the Agos Special Forces Unit. They didn't win. But what happened is that Israel, in their intelligence, was able to infiltrate Hezbollah in a way that nobody anticipated, inflict significant casualties on Hezbollah middle management, and gain access to targeting information that enabled them to eliminate Hezbollah's senior leadership. And there's no organization in the world that can suffer these kind of casualties and not feel an impact. Hezbollah wasn't destroyed. Again, in the final stage, even after Nasrallah's assassination and after the pager explosions, Hezbollah fighters in southern Lebanon beat the best that Israel could throw at them. But there's another aspect of Hezbollah that has to be acknowledged, and that is that it is not just a resistance movement, but a political party that is deeply involved in the governing of Lebanon. And so Hezbollah has to take into account the legitimate will and needs and expectations of the non-Hezbollah Lebanese population. And when Israel started to expand their collective punishment doctrine away from just the Shia of southern Lebanon into all of Lebanon, Hezbollah had to acknowledge that they had to undertake actions that were designed to stop the suffering of Lebanon as a whole. So this ceasefire was agreed upon. It's not a surrender, though, and Hezbollah has assiduously adhered to the terms and conditions of the ceasefire. Israel has not. So Israel's in danger of overplaying its hand and creating the conditions for Hezbollah to continue as a resistance organization whose focus is the expulsion of Israel from Lebanese territory, something that the government of Lebanon can't ignore because it resonates amongst the Lebanese people. And Israel isn't winning any points with its behavior in neighboring Syria, where not only have they expanded out of their occupied Golan territory to take over the Syrian Golan, but they've moved to within a few kilometers of Damascus, and now they've got a new strategy to demilitarize southern Syria. Some have linked it to something called the David Corridor, which will separate Syria from Iraq in the north and in the Kurds. And Israel appears to be acting on this plan. This will only further enhance Hezbollah's stature as a resistance movement and possibly create the conditions on the ground for Iran to work with entities that otherwise would have been opposed to continued Iranian presence in Syria, now viewing Iran's presence necessary for a resistance against Israel, so we can get that lifeline back in place. It won't be as direct or as robust as it was under Assad, but it'll exist nonetheless. Israel may be, cutting its nose off to spite itself here. It's a very complicated situation, and I do think, though, that Trump is seeking to isolate Gaza from all of this, that he wants Gaza to be a standalone issue, even independent upon the West Bank. We see that Trump has greenlit Israeli operations against the West Bank. Israel put tanks into Jenin for the first time in 20 years. But this is an extension of the principles that Trump had bought into under the Abrams Accords in his first term, which basically nullified the West Bank as a potential viable Palestinian state. Gaza has emerged as a different reality. I think what the United States is seeking to do in Gaza is create a standalone entity separate from the West Bank, separate from the Palestinian Authority, that can be called Palestine, but will be governed by something that is not Hamas, and that the resistance aspect of it will be nullified by not allowing Israel to reimpose its occupation, that this will be a truly free and independent Palestinian entity with a robust economy, no longer viewed as an open-air concentration camp. This is the vision. Whether they can implement this or not has yet to be seen. But this would be separate from the West Bank, where Trump will continue to allow the West Bank to be, have settlements go into the West Bank, etc. While I don't agree with the Trump approach, what I can say is that it's genius, because he's identified a fundamental flaw in the Palestinian construct, and that is the divide between Fatah, Hamas, between the Hamas ruling powers and the corruption of the Palestinian Authority, Abu Mazen, President Mohammed Abbas, as one of the most corrupt pro-Israeli shills there is in the region. And, by allowing Israel to go in and take on the Palestinian Authority, it's not Hamas's problem. This isn't Hamas's problem. The Palestinian Authority did nothing to help Hamas during the 15 months of Israeli genocide. And whatever Hamas may want to do, they're not going to come to the help of the Palestinian Authority, who is their fundamental enemy over the West Bank. So, it's a very tricky situation right now. It's tragic for the Palestinian people. I'll say that right off the bat. But I do think that the Trump administration is seeking to isolate Gaza from the rest of these problem sets.
Thank you so much, Scott, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Nope, thanks for having me. And I look forward to all your guests coming on this week and telling you what a fool I am. But you know what? I rest on my track record. So, have fun.
Have fun, Scott.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.